They say the worst kind of betrayal doesn't come from an enemy, but from family. And I'm here to tell you, that's a truth I learned the hardest way possible. My own father sold the farm I gave my life for, while I was dying. And as I lay in that hospital bed, clinging to life, the last thing he said to me wasn't, "I love you." It was that I was a good-for-nothing son. If you've ever felt like your own family has let you down, or if you've been betrayed by someone you trusted more than anything, hit that comment button and tell me where you're watching from. Every week on this channel, I share raw, unfiltered stories of true betrayal and epic comebacks, because I believe your pain deserves a voice, and your triumph deserves to be celebrated. So if you want to turn your pain into power, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, what you're about to hear is just the beginning. I've spent the last few weeks trying to find the words, trying to make sense of what happened. I'm Marcus Reed. I'm 38 in my whole life. My story has been about this farm, my grandfather, a man I respected more than anyone on this planet, built this place from the ground up with his own 2 hands. And he taught me everything: how to feel the soil, how to read the clouds, how to know when a crop was ready just by the way it smelled in the morning sun. He taught me about honor, about a man's word being his bond. I remember him telling me, "Marcus, you're the future of this family. You'll do great things here." His words were my foundation. They were my legacy. And when he passed, I swore to him I'd protect this place, no matter what. But my father, Walter, saw things differently. He never saw the farm as a legacy. He saw it as a liability. He's a big picture kind of guy, or at least he thinks he is. He wanted me to get a real job, become a lawyer, an accountant, something that would give us respect in the city, not dirt under our fingernails. He never believed in me. I could grow the perfect crop, get a record yield, and he'd still find a way to criticize it. He'd say things like, "That's a nice crop, but what about the futures market? Your grandpa would have hedged his bets." He never saw the effort, only the potential for failure. This farm was my whole life, but to him, it was just a piece of land that wasn't making us rich fast enough. He was obsessed with status, with appearances, with what other people thought of us. He wanted a mansion in the suburbs, not a farmhouse that smelled of fresh-cut hay. And that's where the trouble started. That's where the toxic roots of our family began to rot. He never once thought that maybe, just maybe, I was building something different, something with more heart. He just saw me as a fool, holding on to a dead man's dream. Looking back, I can see how every argument, every cold shoulder, every eye roll was a piece of a bigger puzzle. It was a slow, deliberate erosion of my worth. My dad's words were like water on a stone, chipping away at my confidence until I started to believe him, that I was nothing more than a stubborn kid who didn't know anything. I would stand in the fields at sunrise, watching the dew settle on the corn, and for a moment I'd feel a deep sense of peace. I was a farmer, and I was damn good at it. But then I'd hear his voice in my head. "It's not enough. Marcus, you're not enough." And that's the part that hurts the most. It wasn't the selling of the farm that broke my heart. It was the fact that he was willing to do it in the first place. He was willing to sell my life's work, the legacy of my grandfather, and all the love I poured into this land, all because he thought I was a good-for-nothing son. It's funny how you can live with someone your whole life and never really know them. I thought I knew my dad. I thought I understood his pride, his stubbornness, his quiet disapproval. But looking back, it was more than that. It was a pattern. A slow burn kind of toxic that started long before I ever had a voice to protest it. My brother, Lucas, he was the golden child, the firstborn. Everything Dad ever wanted in a son. Lucas was taller, stronger, and always had the right answer for everything. He was a natural athlete, a straight-A student, and he had that easy charm that made everyone, especially our father, fall in love with him. I was 4 years younger, and I existed mostly in his shadow, while Lucas was out on the football field, making the game-winning catch. I was in the back of the barn, learning to fix the tractor with Grandpa. I didn't mind it. I loved the farm. The smell of oil and hay felt more like home than any crowded stadium ever could. But it was clear, even to a kid, that I wasn't the son Dad was proud to show off. I remember one time, when I was about 10, I'd spent all summer saving up, doing odd jobs for the neighbors to buy a new part for the old combine. Grandpa taught me how to install it, and when we finally got the engine to turn over, it was the best sound in the world. I ran to the house, covered in grease and triumph, to tell Dad. He was on the phone with one of his friends, bragging about Lucas's latest wrestling trophy. I stood there, waiting for him to finish, clutching that greasy wrench in my hand like a medal. When he finally hung up, he just looked at me. "What do you want?" "Marcus, go wash up. You're tracking dirt all over the floor." He didn't even see the wrench. He just saw the mess. That was the foundation of our relationship. I was the dirt. Lucas was the gold. And I spent my entire childhood, my entire life trying to scrub that dirt off. I tried everything. I'd bring home perfect report cards, but Dad would just say, "That's great. Now go help your brother with his homework." I'd win the regional farming award for my crop yields, and he'd say, "Good. Now maybe you can learn to be more like Lucas and think bigger." He never once just looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you, son." Not once. It got worse after Lucas died. He was 22, a senior in college. A car accident on a rainy back road. Just gone. The day he died, a part of Dad died too. The part that had hope. The part that had pride. He became a ghost in his own house. And the only time he ever talked to me was to remind me of what I wasn't. "You were supposed to be the sensible one. Marcus, the one who stayed close to home. How come you're not out in the world making a name for yourself like Lucas was?" He had this look in his eyes, like he was searching for Lucas in me. And every time he couldn't find him, he hated what he saw instead. I was the only son he had left, but I was just a constant reminder of the one he lost. Every day, every season, every conversation was a silent accusation. He saw my loyalty to the farm not as strength, but as a weakness, a failure to launch, a coward's retreat from the world. He started telling everyone that the farm was a mistake, that it was a burden I couldn't handle, that I was just clinging to a dead man's memory. He'd say it with this pained, sad look on his face, as if he was the victim and I was the one holding him back. He never saw that the farm wasn't a burden. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I felt I had a purpose, where I wasn't being measured against a ghost. And you know, what's crazy is I never once blamed him for grieving. I got it. He lost his son. But what I couldn't understand was why he was so determined to make me feel like I was a consolation prize, like my life, my work, my very existence was just a poor substitute for the son he actually wanted. And that feeling, that deep-seated belief that I would never be enough for my own father, that's what made the betrayal so easy for him. Because in his mind, he wasn't selling the farm. He was selling a failure. He was selling me. If you've ever felt like a second choice in your own family, I need you to drop a comment with a yes or a no. I'm really curious to know how many of us have been through something similar. There's this thing about a man who's been told he's not enough his whole life. He just works harder. He tries to prove it, not to the world, but to the one person whose opinion actually matters. And so, the farm became my obsession. My whole life. I poured every ounce of myself into it. Not just for Grandpa's memory, but for Dad. Every acre I tilled. Every new piece of equipment I bought. Every long night I spent going over the crop reports. It was all a silent plea. Look at me, look what I'm doing. See me. I went all in on organic farming. I did the research. I went to conferences. I studied every new method out there. People in town thought I was crazy. Organic in Kansas. You'll go bankrupt. Marcus. They'd say. The old-timers. Dad's friends. They'd shake their heads and mutter about how I was disrespecting the land. Dad, of course, was the loudest voice of them all. He'd walk through the fields, a look of pure disdain on his face, muttering about how I was wasting money on compost and expensive seeds. This isn't how your grandpa did it, he'd say, over and over. He worked the land. He didn't coddle it. I tried to explain the science, the sustainability, the long-term vision. He just wasn't interested. He'd just wave his hand and walk away. And that's when I found myself in a really tough spot. The bank wouldn't lend me the money I needed for the new equipment. They said my plan was too risky. They'd heard the rumors in town, and I knew exactly where they came from. So I did what I had to do. I started calling old friends, tapping into every contact I had from my college days, asking for small loans, getting creative. I spent a year hustling, taking on consulting jobs at night, sleeping 4 hours a day, just to keep the farm afloat and get the money I needed. I didn't tell Dad. What was the point? He'd just use it as proof of my failure. But the real emotional drain wasn't the farm work. It was my dad's cold indifference, the way he would go out of his way to praise my sister, Chloe, or our deceased brother, Lucas, in front of me, as if I wasn't even there. I remember it was the 5th anniversary of Lucas's passing. Dad decided to host a huge dinner, a celebration of his life. He spent days calling all of Lucas's old friends, his college buddies, everyone. He rented a huge banquet hall and gave this long, beautiful speech about what a bright future Lucas had. He talked about how Lucas would have been a successful lawyer, how he was a natural leader, how he was the best of us. I sat there, at a table full of strangers, listening to him eulogize a ghost, while I, his living, breathing son, was completely invisible. He never once mentioned the farm, or the fact that I was the one who was here, keeping the family legacy alive. It was like I was a ghost too, haunting the very life he wished I'd had. That night, my heart just ached. I went out to the old barn, the one Grandpa and I fixed up, and I just sat there in the dark, listening to the wind. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice telling me to keep going, to not give up. But for the first time in my life, I felt the truth of my situation settle deep in my bones. It wasn't about the farm anymore. It wasn't about Grandpa's legacy. It was about me. It was about whether I would ever be enough for my own father. And a dark part of me knew the answer. No, I never would be. The quiet tension in our house became a thick, suffocating blanket. Dad and Joyce, his new wife, started talking about the farm more, but not in a good way. Joyce, she's a piece of work, all manicured nails and expensive clothes. She never understood the land, never saw the beauty in it. To her, it was just a giant mess that kept Dad from living the life he deserved. She'd constantly whisper in his ear, "Walter, you need to be realistic. This place is a money pit. Marcus is holding you back." I could hear them talking in the kitchen at night. Their voices were low, conspiratorial. It was like they were planning a hostile takeover. I started feeling this subtle shift. I'd find myself looking over my shoulder, wondering what they were up to. I thought it was just paranoia, a side effect of the exhaustion and stress. But it was more than that. I remember walking into the house one afternoon and seeing Joyce standing in the living room, a binder in her hands, talking to Dad. She slammed it shut when she saw me. "Just discussing some business. Marcus," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad didn't say a word, just walked away. It was a small moment, but it felt like a cold stone dropping into my stomach. I knew, without a doubt, that something was happening, but I was so tired. And I didn't know then that this was all just a prelude to the catastrophe that was about to unfold. I just didn't know how much my life was about to unravel, all because of my dad's quiet disappointment. And I had no idea that my biggest sacrifice was about to lead to my greatest betrayal. But then, everything changed. It all came crashing down, and the foundation I thought I was building my life on crumbled in just one day. My relationship with Dad wasn't the only thing strained by the farm. My marriage was to my wife, Jessica. She's a good woman. She tried. She really did. But she wasn't a farm girl. She was a city girl. From Denver. She loved me. But she hated seeing me work myself to death, always chasing a carrot that was just out of reach. She wanted a normal life, weekends off, a family vacation that didn't involve checking the weather forecast every 10 minutes, and a husband who wasn't constantly stressed out. But I was so consumed with proving Dad wrong that I couldn't see her pain. I remember this one night. It was late, maybe 2 a.m. I was in the barn, trying to fix a leaky irrigation pipe. We had a storm rolling in, and if that pipe didn't get fixed, we'd lose a whole field of young corn. The rain was coming down in sheets. I was soaked, shivering, and exhausted. My phone buzzed. It was Jessica. "Marcus, are you coming home?" she texted. "Chloe has a fever." I looked at the pipe, then at my phone. A part of me, the part that was a father, wanted to drop everything and run home. But the other part, the part that was a son desperate for his dad's approval, told me to stay. "Almost done," I texted back, my fingers numb from the cold. I didn't get home until sunrise. Chloe was okay, but Jessica was furious. "The farm is more important than us," she said, her voice quiet but full of a cold, tired anger. "The farm is your mistress. Marcus." The words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't wrong. The tension at home was a direct reflection of the tension with Dad. He would show up unannounced, walking through the fields with Joyce, criticizing every decision I made. "Look at this compost pile. Walter," Joyce would say, wrinkling her nose. "This is what he's spending our inheritance on." Dad would just nod, his face a mask of disappointment. He'd talk about how our family name was getting a reputation for being eccentric and unstable. My organic methods, which were actually starting to produce incredible results, were just more proof to him that I was a failure. The breaking point happened 2 months ago. It was the first big harvest of the season, a day I'd been waiting for my entire life. My organic heirloom corn was perfect, the best crop I'd ever grown. I was so proud. I called Dad, my voice shaking with excitement. "Dad, it's done. It's the best crop we've ever had." A moment of silence on the other end. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "That's great. Marcus," he said, his voice flat. "Listen, Lucas's college roommate, David, is in town. He's a senior partner at a law firm in Chicago now. We're having a dinner for him at the country club tonight. You should probably come." That was it. "No, I'm proud of you. No, I told you so." Just a reminder that someone else, a ghost, was more important than my life's work. I looked at my hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, and a wave of pure, white-hot fury washed over me. I was 38 years old, and still I was living in my dead brother's shadow. "Dad, I can't," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have to stay here. The harvest isn't done." "It can wait," he snapped. "This is important. This is about family." He was talking about David, a man I barely knew, and as he spoke, I could almost see him in my mind's eye standing tall, chest puffed out, telling David about his successful son, Lucas, and then, as an afterthought, mentioning me, the farmer's son, the one who stayed behind, the one who wasn't enough. That night, I didn't go to the dinner. I stayed in the fields, under the cold, silent stars. The tractor engine hummed a low, steady rhythm. The corn stood tall, a monument to my effort. But my heart was a hollow ache. I felt utterly, completely alone. I thought to myself, is this all it's ever going to be? Am I always going to be just a reflection of what he lost? And in that moment, in the silence of the night, with the corn whispering in the wind, I felt something in me break. I'd spent my whole life sacrificing for a man who didn't see me, and a dream that he wanted to see fail. I didn't know then that this was the final straw. I thought I was at my lowest point, that nothing could possibly be worse than this profound, bone-deep loneliness. I was wrong. The betrayal that was coming next would be so much colder, so much more devastating. And I had no idea that my entire life was about to be destroyed in a way I could never have imagined. I stood there in the dark, the drone of the tractor a low hum in my ears, and felt a profound, bone-deep hollowness. The corn was my monument, but it felt like a headstone. The air was cold, but my blood felt like ice. I was 38 years old and still I was standing in the shadows of a ghost, trying to prove my worth to a man who didn't even see me. I thought that was the worst it could get. I thought the pain of my father's indifference was the lowest I could sink. I was wrong. It was just the prelude. The first jolt was a sharp, biting pain in my chest. It wasn't a sudden crushing blow like you see in movies. It was more like a handful of stones, sharp and heavy, dropping into my rib cage. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs felt like they were shrinking. The pain radiated from my chest, up my neck and down my left arm, a dull ache that grew into a fiery, relentless burn. I gripped the steering wheel of the tractor, my knuckles white, and tried to tell myself it was just indigestion, just stress. But the cold sweat that beaded on my forehead told a different story. I felt a wave of nausea, and the humming of the engine started to sound distorted, like it was underwater. The stars above me began to blur, and the world spun in a slow, sickening circle. I knew exactly what this was. I was having a heart attack. My mind raced, not to the hospital, but to the farm. Who would finish the harvest? Who would feed the livestock? Who would protect my grandfather's legacy? Even as my body screamed for help, my brain was still stuck on the farm, on the work, on the impossible burden that was my whole life. I somehow managed to cut the engine. The sudden silence, a deafening roar in my ears. I stumbled out of the tractor seat and collapsed onto the cold dirt, the rich scent of the soil a grim comfort. The pain intensified, 1,000 tiny knives twisting in my chest. I couldn't call for help. I couldn't even stand. My vision tunneled into a small, flickering pinhole of light, and the last thing I saw before the world went black was the towering silhouette of my corn swaying in the wind, a silent witness to my breaking. When I woke up, I was disoriented. The air was sterile, and a low, persistent beeping filled the room. The world was a blur of white walls and humming machines. A woman with a kind face and tired eyes was standing over me, adjusting a drip. She was a nurse. "Welcome back, Mr. Reed," she said softly. "You're in the hospital. You had a pretty severe heart attack. You're a lucky man. Lucky." I felt anything but lucky. I was tethered to a bed, a prisoner in my own body. The pain was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. But the fear was still there, a cold lump in my throat. The days that followed were a blur of doctors' visits, tests, and the constant Monotonous beep of the heart monitor. My father, Walter, came to see me. He didn't come alone. Joyce, his wife, was with him. They stood at the foot of my bed, a perfect, polished couple in a room filled with sickness and uncertainty. Dad's face was a mask of concern, but his eyes were cold. "We were so worried, Marcus," he said, his voice a practiced sympathy. Joyce nodded along, her gaze flitting around the room as if sizing it up for a renovation. I wanted to tell him about the harvest, about the corn, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt like it was full of sand. I just looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not worry, not love. Something else. Something I couldn't place. They brought me papers. Just some hospital forms. "Marcus," Dad said, his voice still too calm. "The doctors said we need to get your medical power of attorney sorted out. Just in case. You know, for your own good." I was so weak, so drugged up on pain medication, that I didn't even think to question it. I trusted my father, my own blood. He was here, looking out for me. What son doesn't trust his own dad? I signed the papers, my hand shaky and unsure, and handed them back. "Thank you, son," he said, and I saw that flicker in his eyes again. It was a flash of something I didn't recognize, something cold and predatory. Then he was gone. I was alone again, left with my racing thoughts and the relentless beep. The days stretched into weeks. My sister, Chloe, was my only real visitor. She would come and sit with me, just holding my hand, telling me stories about her work as a photographer, about the little things in town. She was a rock. My parents were gone, off on some vacation to clear their heads. As Chloe put it, even with my sister there, I felt an unshakable dread. I was haunted by the image of that document I had signed. The phrase power of attorney echoed in my head, a drumbeat of suspicion I couldn't ignore. I kept trying to get the nurse to tell me what was in it, but she just gave me a gentle, sad smile. "Don't worry, mister. Read. You're safe here." But I didn't feel safe. I felt a chill, a deep, unsettling cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't until I was strong enough to get out of bed, to walk the hospital corridors, that the truth began to unravel. My heart was healing, but my mind was starting to race. I was finally lucid enough to be afraid. I found a public computer in the hospital library and started searching for a Midwest development, the company Joyce had mentioned in hushed tones. The results were immediate. They were a land development firm, known for buying up large rural properties and turning them into suburban subdivisions. My stomach dropped. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe Dad was just looking into them for some reason. But the icy dread in my chest told me otherwise. I called my sister. "Chloe, have you seen Dad? Have you talked to him?" I asked, my voice frantic. "He's been gone for weeks. Marcus," she said, her voice laced with a subtle bitterness. "They're in Cancun. Joyce said they needed a break from all the stress. They've been posting all over Instagram, living it up." A cold fist clenched in my gut. Cancun. The very word felt like a slap in the face. My parents were sunning themselves on a beach while I was learning to walk again in a hospital gym. It didn't make sense. Not unless... The next day, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, to the hospital, from Midwest Development. I ripped it open with shaking hands. "Dear Mr. Reed, thank you for your recent cooperation in the sale of your 200-acre property. We look forward to beginning our development of the new Vance Estates community on October 1st. The paper felt like a live wire in my hands. Vance Estates. They were naming a housing development after my family, the very family that was being torn apart. My farm, the one I gave my life for, sold. While I was dying, a tidal wave of rage and disbelief crashed over me. I wanted to scream, to tear the letter to shreds, to run out of the hospital and strangle my father. But I couldn't. I was too weak. I crumpled the letter in my hand and called Dad. It went straight to voicemail. I called Joyce. Same thing. They were gone. I tried to call a lawyer, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't dial the number. I felt a crushing sense of isolation. My own family had conspired against me. They had used my sickness, my helplessness, against me. I was alone, and I was broken. But then, a strange feeling came over me. A calm, cold, and calculated resolve. This wasn't about the farm anymore. This wasn't about my grandfather's legacy. This was about something much more fundamental. This was about me. About the man my father thought he was leaving for dead. This was about justice. The farm was gone. My old life was over. But in its place, a new clarity was forming. My heart attack hadn't killed me. It had freed me. It had severed the chains that had been binding me to a past I couldn't change, and a father I could never please. For the first time, I wasn't fighting for the farm. I was fighting for myself. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my father had no idea what he had just started. He had no idea who he was messing with. He thought he was dealing with a good-for-nothing son. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. The game was about to change. I just had to get out of this hospital first. And as I sat there, in that cold hospital room, a plan began to form. A plan so cold, so perfect, so utterly devastating, that it made the betrayal feel almost worth it. He took my land, my legacy, and my past. But he left me my future. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. It's a funny thing. Waking up from what should have killed you. The world looks different. The air tastes different. The things that mattered before, the grudges, the desperate need for approval, they just melt away. When I left the hospital, I wasn't the same Marcus who'd collapsed in the cornfield. That man was gone. In his place was someone new, someone colder, someone with a plan. I flew to Silicon Valley. I walked into a gleaming, glass-walled office building, a world away from the dust and dirt of my farm. The receptionist asked if I had an appointment. I just smiled, a real smile this time, and said, "Tell the board that Marcus Vance is here. I think they'll want to see me." I hadn't been to AgriSync in a decade. I'd built it remotely, anonymously, a ghost in the machine. My identity was hidden behind layers of corporate structure and legal shells. I was the silent partner, the invisible hand guiding the company from my farmhouse in Kansas. I wanted it that way. I wanted to be a farmer, not a tech mogul. But now, it was time to let the ghost become real. I sat in a boardroom surrounded by people who had no idea who I was, and I laid out the situation. I told them about my heart attack, my father's betrayal, and the sale of my farm to our own subsidiary. Midwest Development. There was a silence that hung in the air, a kind of stunned disbelief. Then, my COO, a brilliant woman named Lena, started to laugh. Not a mean laugh, but a laugh of pure, unadulterated shock. "You're telling us," she said, wiping a tear from her eye, "that your dad sold your land to our company for a fraction of its value he stole from you, and he sold it to you." I just nodded. The irony was a bitter, perfect taste on my tongue. We went to work. Fast. Lena and my legal team, they were a force of nature. We pulled every document, every filing, every piece of evidence. We were going to do this clean. No yelling. No threats. Just the truth. cold and hard as a slab of granite. The plan was simple and, I thought, beautiful. We were going to make it public. My father had chosen to make my life a public spectacle. He had stood on the town square and lied to our friends and neighbors. It was only right that the truth be revealed in the same place. The town council meeting was set for a Tuesday night. The meeting hall was packed. Farmers, business owners, town council members, everyone was there. They were buzzing with gossip about the big news, the Vance farm, sold for a pittance to some big-shot development company from out of state. My father, Walter, was there. Of course. He was in the front row with Joyce, both of them dressed to the nines, looking every bit the triumphant, grieving family. Joyce was on her phone, live streaming the event. I could almost hear her chirping to her followers about how her husband was making the tough decisions for his sick son. My father's face was a mask of practiced solemnity. He was ready for his moment in the spotlight. He was ready to tell his version of the story. The council chairman, a man named Bob, called the meeting to order. "First on the agenda tonight," he said, "is the presentation from Midwest Development regarding their proposed Vance Estates community. Mr. Walter Vance will be presenting on behalf of the family." My father stood up, and a hush fell over the room. He walked to the front, confident, polished, ready to take credit for destroying my legacy. "Thank you, Chairman," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Tonight marks a new chapter for our community, a chapter where we embrace progress instead of clinging to the past." He looked out at the faces in the crowd, at his neighbors, and lied straight to their faces. He talked about how I had been too ill to manage the farm, how he was making the hard choices to ensure my financial future. He painted himself as a hero. My heart was a drumbeat in my chest. I watched him, my father, and a wave of something so cold and clear washed over me. It wasn't hatred. It was nothing. Just an empty space where a son's love for his father used to be. I waited for him to finish. He ended his speech with a flourish, a smile of quiet self-satisfaction on his face. "My son," he said, looking out at the crowd. "Though he isn't here tonight, he fully supports this development. This was a family decision." And that's when I walked in. I stepped through the back doors of the meeting hall, and every head turned. I was wearing a simple jacket, a pair of jeans, a world away from the expensive suit my father had on. I could feel every eye on me. The whispers started instantly. "It's Marcus. He's supposed to be sick." My father's eyes locked with mine from the front of the room. The color drained from his face. Joyce stopped filming. Her phone slowly slid down, and the screen went dark. She looked at me like I was a ghost. I walked to the front of the room, my legs steady, my back straight. I didn't say a word to him. I just stood beside him, a silent accusation. The council chairman, Bob, cleared his throat. "Marcus, Mr. Reed, what are you doing here?" "I'm here," I said, my voice calm, but it filled the entire room. "To correct my father's story. This was not a family decision. It was a betrayal." A gasp went through the crowd. My father found his voice. "Marcus, son, you shouldn't be here. You're still recovering. You're confused." He tried to put on the concerned father act, but his eyes were panicked. "I'm not confused, Dad," I said, my voice still low and steady. "I'm just lucid. You sold this farm while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. You used a fraudulent power of attorney and you sold it for a pittance." The murmurs grew louder. People started whispering about the price, about the value of the land. "That's a lie!" Walter yelled, his mask of calm finally cracking. "He's sick. He's not thinking straight. I made a sound business decision to protect our family from his debts." The crowd was looking back and forth between us, a tennis match of outrage and accusation. I just shook my head. "What debts? Dad? My farm was profitable. I had no debt. You sold it to pay for your vacation to Cancun." A gasp went through the crowd. Joyce's face was white. "How do you know that?" Walter hissed, leaning close to me. I just smiled. "I know everything, Dad. Because you didn't sell this farm to some random development company. You sold it to me." And there it was. The final, devastating twist. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Walter's jaw dropped. That's insane," he stammered. "You're a farmer. You don't have a company." I just shook my head. "I am a farmer, Dad, but I'm also a lot more than that." At that moment, the doors to the hall opened, and two people walked in. A man in a tailored suit, and a woman with an easy, confident stride. It was my lawyer, David, and my COO, Lena. They walked straight to the front of the room. "I'd like to introduce," I said, my voice still steady, "Mr. David Chen, my legal counsel, and Miss Lena Petrov, my chief operating officer from AgriSync Innovations." Whispers started immediately. AgriSync, that tech company. "The one from the news." The crowd was buzzing with a nervous energy now. David walked up to the podium and placed a stack of documents on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and professional, "my client, Mr. Marcus Vance, is the founder and majority shareholder of AgriSync Innovations, a company valued at over $500 million. AgriSync owns a subsidiary company called Midwest Development. This means that when Walter Vance sold his son's farm to Midwest Development, he was, in fact, selling it to his son." The room exploded. People started talking, yelling, pointing at my father and Joyce. Walter stood there, frozen, his face a perfect picture of pure, utter shock. He looked at me, his eyes wide, a question in them. "How?" he whispered. "How could you be a secret billionaire?" I just looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to justify myself. I didn't feel the need to explain. He had no right to my explanation. "It doesn't matter how." "Dad," I said, my voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. "It matters what you did." The chairman of the town council, Bob, cleared his throat. "So, what happens now?" he asked. I looked at Walter, my father, and the man who had tried to bury me. I felt the cold anger swell inside me. The confrontation had just begun, and for the first time in my life, I was in complete control. The room fell into chaos. The quiet shock turned into a low roar, then a storm of shouting and pointing. People I'd known my whole life, neighbors who'd watched me grow up, were looking at my father with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You sold his land," someone yelled from the back. "How could you? Walter!" another voice demanded. My father just stood there, his face a perfect picture of a man whose entire world just shattered. All that practiced confidence, all that righteous indignation, it was gone. He looked like a little boy who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie was my life's work and the jar was a $500 million company. Joyce, his wife, the one who had been filming his big moment, let out a choked sob. She turned to Walter, and for a second I thought she was going to comfort him. Instead, she just glared. "You didn't tell me he was rich." She spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss. Then she turned and ran out of the room, her high heels clicking a furious rhythm on the floor. In that moment, the entire town saw their relationship for what it was, a transaction. My lawyer, David, stepped forward and took command of the room. He was a master of his craft, all calm efficiency. He laid out the legal documents, the sale contracts, the evidence of Joyce's fraud and Walter's complicity. He explained how we would be filing charges for fraud and theft. He told them the land sale was void, that the contract had been terminated. He was so clear, so precise, that by the time he was done, there was no room for doubt. The applause that followed was a strange sound. It wasn't a celebration. It was the sound of a community finding its moral compass again. After the meeting, I stood outside in the cool night air. The crowd dispersed, their whispers turning into a buzzing murmur of disbelief. I saw my father standing alone on the steps of the hall, the hero of his own story, now just an old man, abandoned and broken. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, lost. I didn't feel rage anymore, just a profound, quiet sadness. The kind of sadness you feel for a man who lost everything because he never appreciated what he had. The following weeks were a blur of lawyers, police reports, and paperwork. Joyce filed for divorce a few days later, citing irreconcilable differences and demanding a hefty settlement. Walter got nothing. The money from the land sale was seized as evidence for the legal case against him. He was left with no wife, no money, and no reputation. But here's the thing. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about what you do when you get it. For a long time, I thought the only way I could heal was by making my father hurt as much as he hurt me. But seeing him stand there, stripped of his lies, a broken man in the cold night, I realized I had already won. The real victory wasn't the public confrontation or the legal charges. The real victory was the freedom I felt inside. I dropped the civil lawsuit. Walter had nothing left to take. Instead, I gave him a choice. He could face the full weight of the law, prison time for fraud and theft, or he could accept a deal. He would have to publicly apologize to the town, serve 1,000 hours of community service, and work to restore the farm to its original condition. No payment, no settlement, just work. Hard, honest work. He looked at me, a flicker of that old pride still in his eyes, and he tried to refuse. But my lawyer laid out his options, and he had no choice. I saw him a few weeks ago. He was working in the old cornfield, clearing the land, the same land he had tried to destroy. The same hands that had signed away my life were now pulling weeds, covered in dirt and sweat. He was a different man. He didn't look up at me, but I saw something in his posture, in the way he worked. Not pride, not anger, just acceptance. And I knew, for the first time in a long time, that we were finally on the right path. I'm back on the farm now. I didn't rebuild the way I was before. This time, I'm building it for me. I've partnered with a local university, and we're turning the farm into a research center for organic farming. AgriSync is providing all the funding and technology. We're hiring local kids, teaching them the science and the soul of the land. My sister, Chloe, is the head of our marketing and public relations. She's telling our story, the real one, the one about family, resilience, and what happens when you finally stop trying to be someone else's dream and start living your own. I still drive my old pickup truck. I still get dirt under my fingernails. I'm still a farmer. But now, I'm also something more. I'm a man who finally knows his own worth. I didn't need a $500 million company to prove my value. I needed to see that my father's validation was never mine to earn. It was his to give, and he chose not to. And that choice, as painful as it was, set me free. This story, the one you just heard, it's not just my story. It's for anyone who's ever been told they're not enough. It's for anyone who has a dream that someone tried to bury. And it's for anyone who needs to know that no matter what happens, no one can take your worth from you. You have to find it for yourself. If this story hit home for you, if it gave you a little bit of hope or a whole lot of catharsis, I need you to do something for me. First, hit that like button and let me know I'm not alone in this. Second, find the comments and share your story. Let me know if you've been through something similar. Your story matters, and by sharing it, you might just help someone else find their own strength. And finally, if you want to turn your pain into power, if you want to be a part of a community that celebrates raw honesty and epic comebacks, then hit that subscribe button right now. Don't let your past define you. Let's build a better future. Together. Thanks for listening.